Welcome back to Family Drama Stories. Today I'm bringing you the story of Hadley, a 27-year-old woman from Charlotte, North Carolina, who spent over a decade building a life completely on her own, from nothing, after her own mother pushed her out the door at 16. Not 18, 16. No warning, no plan, no safety net, just a bag and a door that closed behind her. She worked her way up, earned her own place, built something real, and then one Sunday morning, her mother showed up at that apartment like nothing had ever happened. Her mother looked around the place Hadley had built by herself, sat down on the couch like she owned it, and said, "Your older sister starts medical school next year. She needs this apartment so she can get used to the area." Hadley didn't flinch. She looked her mother straight in the eye and said, "Or you could kick her out like you did to me and let her figure it out herself." That one sentence cracked 11 years of silence wide open. What followed just a family argument. It was a series of moves, calculated, deliberate, and frankly shocking, that forced Hadley to make a choice: walk away quietly like she always had, or finally stop letting people rewrite her story. She chose to stop. And what she uncovered in the process, something buried in legal documents her family never expected her to find, changed everything. Not just for her, but for all of them. Before we get into what happened next, drop a comment and tell me what time it is where you are and what city you re-in. I love knowing how far these stories travel. And honestly, knowing you out there listening means everything to this channel. And if this kind of story is what you come here for, real, raw, family drama that actually goes somewhere, make sure you resubscribed so you never miss one. Hadley was 16 the night her mother pointed at the door and didn't blink. There was no argument leading up to it. No dramatic blowout. No broken curfew. No final straw that anyone could point to later and say, "That was why." Her mother simply walked into her room one evening, folded her arms, and told her the house was getting cramped. Courtney needed more space to study. The S8s were coming up, and Courtney's future required focus. Hadley's room, apparently, was the solution. She had 3 days' worth of clothes, $40 she'd saved from babysitting the neighbor's kids, and no idea where she was going to sleep that night. She was 16 years old. She hadn't done anything wrong. That was the part that stayed with her longest. Not the anger, not the cold air outside, but the absolute ordinariness of how it happened. Her mother said it the same way she'd tell someone to move a chair. The difference between Hadley and her older sister, Courtney, hadn't started that night. It had been building for years, in small and consistent ways that Hadley had learned not to name out loud. Courtney was 5 years older, and in their house, that gap felt more like a rank. Violin lessons starting at age 8. A private tutor for math through middle school. A college prep coach her junior year of high school, paid for without a single conversation about cost. When Courtney failed her chemistry final sophomore year, their mother found a specialist tutor within the week. When Hadley placed in the top 15% of her class and qualified for a partial academic scholarship her freshman year, her mother set the paperwork aside and said she'd get to it. She never did. "You can handle things on your own," her mother told her. "Courtney needs more support." Hadley stopped asking questions after that. The night she was pushed out, Courtney was home. She was standing in the hallway when Hadley came downstairs with her bag. They made eye contact for a moment. Just a moment. And Courtney looked away. She didn't say a word. Not "I am sorry." Not "where will you go." Nothing. She stepped back into her room and closed the door. And that silence followed Hadley out into the street and stayed with her for 11 years. 11 years. That was how long it took for her mother to show up again. Not to apologize, not to explain, but to ask for something. Hadley had been home on a Sunday morning when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, too deliberate to be a neighbor. She opened the door and there they were. Her mother in a pressed blouse. Her father standing half a step behind with his hands in his pockets. The same way he always stood when he already knew what was about to happen and had decided not to interfere. Hadley didn't step aside right away. She stood in the doorway and waited. Her mother looked past her into the apartment. A brief, assessing glance, then smiled. "Can we come in?" She didn't wait for a full answer before moving forward. They sat on Hadley's couch. Her mother straightened the hem of her blouse and got to it, without asking how Hadley was doing. Without commenting on anything except to say that Courtney had just been accepted into a medical program and would need to relocate to Charlotte by the following fall. She needs somewhere close to campus, her mother said. Somewhere she can settle in properly. And you got this place. Hadley stood in the middle of the room. She didn't pull out a chair. She didn't sit down. She let the sentence sit there between them, and her father stared at the floor. She needs this place. Hadley repeated, her voice flat. Her mother nodded like it was a reasonable thing to ask. Like 11 years hadn't passed. Like a 16-year-old girl hadn't walked out into the dark with $40 and nowhere to go. They left without an answer that afternoon. Her father hadn't said a single word the entire time. But Hadley knew this wasn't the last time they would knock. Those years didn't leave much room for looking back. Hadley just kept moving. The first place she landed was a classmate's house. The classmate's name was Simone, and she was the only person Hadley had told. Not because Hadley had planned to tell anyone, but because Simone had noticed her sitting outside school before first period with a bag that wasn't a school bag, and she simply asked if Hadley needed somewhere to stay. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask for how long. She just said, "You can stay with us as long as you need to." Simone's family didn't have much. They rented a 2-bedroom house about a mile from school, and her mother worked night shifts as a nurse at a hospital across town. Most mornings, Simone's mother came home just as Hadley and Simone were leaving for school, tired, still in scrubs. But she always made sure there was food in the refrigerator, and never once made Hadley feel like a problem that needed solving. That kind of quiet generosity was something Hadley had never experienced inside her own family's house, and she didn't take a single day of it for granted. She stayed with Simone for close to 2 years. By the time she finished high school, she had been working a cashier shift at a CVS 2 miles away for almost a year, early mornings on weekends, a few evenings during the week. Whatever hours she could fit without failing her classes. She kept every dollar she made in a small envelope tucked inside a textbook. She didn't spend money on anything that was necessary, because she understood. At 17, that money was the only thing standing between her and having nowhere to sleep again. The job at the real estate office came when she was 18. It was a small firm in Charlotte, 4 agents, 1 office manager, and a front desk that needed someone reliable for 30 hours a week. Hadley applied because the listing said no experience required, and she showed up in the one blazer she owned. Within her first month, her manager noticed something. While processing a stack of new lease agreements for filing, Hadley had flagged 3 separate errors: a missing cosigner clause, an incorrect renewal term, and a deposit amount that didn't match the verbal agreement on record. The manager, a methodical woman named Carol, called her into the office and asked how she'd caught them. Hadley said she'd just read everything carefully. Carol enrolled her in a night accounting program at a local community college within the month and told her the firm would cover the tuition. That decision changed the direction of everything. Hadley studied at night and worked during the day. She memorized lease structures the way other people memorized song lyrics, not because she found them interesting, but because she had made herself a promise the night she walked out of her mother's house. She would never again live somewhere she didn't fully understand the terms of. She would never be removed from a place because she hadn't read the fine print. Every clause, every renewal condition, every termination notice requirement, she knew them cold. That knowledge sat in the back of her mind like a locked door with her name on it. By 23, she had saved enough to sign her own lease. A one-bedroom in a quiet part of Charlotte. Nothing remarkable. Worn carpet, a window that stuck in the winter, but hers. Simone came over the day she moved in and helped carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs. They didn't have furniture yet, so they sat on the floor that evening with a pizza box between them. Hadley didn't say much. At some point, without planning to, she started crying, not loudly. Just the kind of quiet that happens when something you've been holding for years finally sets down. Simone didn't make a big deal of it. She just handed Hadley another slice and turned on a playlist from her phone. By 27, Hadley had been promoted to senior accountant. She drove her own car, paid her own bills, and lived in a clean apartment in South End, Charlotte, with a view she had chosen herself. She hadn't needed anyone to hand her any of it. But the quiet she'd built around that life was about to be tested, because just days after her mother's visit, her phone started ringing from numbers she had deleted a long time ago. It started with a text from an Aunt Hadley hadn't heard from in 4 years. The message was warm in the way that only calculated messages are, asking how she was doing, mentioning how proud everyone was of her, and then, almost as an afterthought, bringing up Courtney S. acceptance and how difficult the transition to medical school would be for someone starting over in a new city. The aunt didn't ask for anything directly. She didn't have to. The implication was threaded through every sentence, neat and deliberate, like someone had handed her a script. By the end of that same week, 4 more messages had come in. A cousin Hadley had met twice at family gatherings. An uncle who had never once reached out in her adult life, and 2 women she recognized only as friends of her mother who had somehow gotten her number. Each message had a different opening line and the same underlying current. Courtney deserved support, Hadley was clearly doing well, and family was supposed to mean something. One of the cousins wrote, "I know you've had your differences, but this is bigger than that." Hadley read it twice, then set her phone face down on the counter. None of them mentioned that she had been 16 when she left. None of them asked how she had gotten to where she was. Then came Courtney's Instagram story. It was a photo of Courtney in a white medical coat, standing in front of what appeared to be a university building, squinting slightly in the sun and smiling. The caption read, "So grateful for every sacrifice this family has made to get me here. Could have done this without the people who believed in me." There was a string of heart emojis at the end. Within hours, the comments were full of family members and old family friends congratulating her, calling her an inspiration, saying how proud everyone was. Hadley's name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. The post did exactly what it was designed to do. It framed Courtney as someone the family had poured everything into, which made Hadley, by extension, the person standing in the way of that investment paying off. She didn't comment. She closed the app and went back to work. 3 days later, her mother sent a Zoom link to a group Hadley had known she was still part of. The invite said family check-in and listed a Sunday evening time. Hadley almost didn't join. But something, curiosity, maybe, or the particular exhaustion of not knowing what was being said about her, made her click the link. There were 18 people on that call. Her mother had prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Hadley stared at her screen and processed that slowly. An actual slide deck, with a title page that read Supporting Courtney's Future, a Family Plan. Her mother walked through it slide by slide, Courtney's program details, the cost of living in Charlotte, the timeline for her first year. And then, on the fourth slide, under a heading that said Temporary Housing Solution, there was a photograph. It took Hadley a moment to place it, and then her stomach dropped. It was her apartment. A photo taken from the street, showing the building's exterior, the South End address clearly visible on the awning. Hadley didn't know when it had been taken or how her mother had gotten it, but there it was, projected to 18 members of her family as a line item in a logistical plan. Her mother looked directly into the camera and said, "Hadley, you've built something really lovely for yourself. We all so proud. And we were hoping you'd be willing to contribute to this, as a family." 18 faces turned toward Hadley, small video tile in the corner of the screen. She reached over, turned her camera off, and clicked Leave Meeting. She didn't type anything in the chat. She didn't send a follow-up message. She simply closed her laptop and sat in the silence of her own apartment for a long moment. 40 minutes later, a text came in from Courtney. "I know you didn't want that. I know this isn't fair to you. But I genuinely don't have other options right now. Just 1 year, Hadley. That is all I'm asking." Hadley read it. She put her phone down without responding. She was still sitting there an hour later when a notification came through her business management portal, an email flagged as routine correspondence. She opened it out of habit, scanning the subject line, Inquiry regarding lease addendum, Unit 4C. Someone had contacted the management office that afternoon, asking about the process for adding an occupant to her lease agreement. The email was asking her to confirm whether she had authorized this inquiry. Hadley read it once. Then she read it again. Then she picked up her phone and called the management office directly. And what the woman on the other end told her made Hadley pull out a chair and sit down slowly, like the floor had shifted under her. The man at the front desk sounded uncomfortable, the way people do when they know they delivering bad news and aren't sure how much of it is their fault. He confirmed that a woman had come into the management office 2 days prior. She had identified herself as Hadley's mother, presented paperwork requesting that a second occupant be added to the lease for Unit 4C, and explained that Hadley had already agreed to the arrangement, but was currently traveling for work and had asked her to handle the administrative side. The woman had been polite, organized, and had brought documents that included what appeared to be Hadley's signature on the addendum request form. The only reason nothing had been processed yet was that the office had a standing policy requiring written email confirmation from the primary leaseholder before making any changes to an active lease. The email request had gone out that morning, which was how Hadley was finding out about it now. Hadley asked him to hold all paperwork and make no changes under any circumstances. She kept her voice steady. She thanked him. She hung up. Then she sat at her kitchen table without moving for a full minute. She had not signed anything. She had not spoken to anyone at that office. She had not been traveling for work. Every word her mother had told that man was a fabrication, delivered with documents that carried a version of her signature she had never written. She called Simone. Simone was at her door in 20 minutes, still in her jacket, keys in her hand like she had left without putting them down. She didn't ask for a full explanation before sitting down on the kitchen floor next to Hadley, the same way she had done when they were teenagers, back when the floor was the only place that felt honest. Hadley walked her through it: the email, the phone call, the paperwork, the signature. Simone listened without interrupting. When Hadley finished, Simone was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "This isn't a family dispute anymore. What your mother did has a name. It is lease fraud. That's a criminal act." Hadley heard the words. She understood them. But what she kept returning to, sitting there on her kitchen floor, one's of the legal category. It was the pattern. Her mother had used paperwork to take something from her once before, a form left unfiled, a scholarship that disappeared because no one had bothered to sign it. That had been careless, or so Hadley had told herself for years. This was not careless. This was deliberate. This was her mother walking into a building with forged documents and a rehearsed story, trying to hand Hadley's home to Courtney the same way she had handed Courtney Hadley Atze's bedroom 11 years ago. The method had changed. The logic hadn't. Hadley didn't cry. She felt something colder than grief, a kind of clarity that arrives when you finally stop being surprised. It was Simone who brought up Dr. Fitch. She mentioned him carefully. The way you mention something you know the other person is going to resist. A therapist she had started seeing a couple of years earlier. Someone she trusted. She said Hadley didn't have to go more than once. She said she would make the call herself if Hadley wanted. She said, "You've been holding this for 11 years. You don't have to keep doing that alone." Hadley didn't want to go. She said yes anyway. The appointment was 3 days later. Dr. Fitch's office was small and unhurried, the kind of space that didn't rush you into feeling anything in particular. He didn't open with the question Hadley had been bracing for. He didn't ask her how she was doing or how the situation was making her feel. He looked at her for a moment after she finished describing the last few weeks, and then he asked, quietly, "Have you ever been allowed to be angry about any of this?" Hadley opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She sat with that question for the rest of the session and most of the drive home. That evening, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, a local area code, but not one saved in her contacts. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured, a little careful, like someone choosing their words with intention. "Is this Hadley?" "This is Renee, your mother's sister." A pause. "I think it's time we talked. There's something you need to know, and I should have told you a long time ago." Hadley had met her mother's younger sister maybe 3 or 4 times in her entire life, at gatherings so long ago they barely registered as memories. But something in the steadiness of that voice made her stay on the line. Renee didn't ease into it. She said what she had to say from the first sentence. She told Hadley that she was her mother's younger sister, that the two of them had been close once, genuinely close, the kind of sisters who knew each other's business without having to ask. That closeness had ended the night Hadley was sent out of the house at 16. Renee had argued against it. She had told her sister directly that what she was doing was wrong, that Hadley was a child, that there were other ways to handle whatever friction existed in that house. Her sister had not taken that well. They had barely spoken since. I should have done more than argue, Renee said. Ilev carried that. Then she told Hadley about the trust. Their grandfather, Hadley's mother's father, had passed away when Hadley was around 8 years old. Before he died, he had worked with an estate attorney to set up a formal trust. The trust held two assets: a sum of money and the family property, which at the time was the house where Hadley's grandparents had lived. The trust named two beneficiaries, Hadley and Courtney, by name, in equal shares. Not their mother, not their father, the granddaughters. The house Hadley's mother currently lived in had been purchased using funds drawn from that trust, a transaction that had been processed quietly, years ago, in a way that Renee said she hadn't understood the full implications of until recently. According to the trust's original terms, any sale, transfer, or significant financial transaction involving trust assets required the written consent of both named beneficiaries. Hadley had never been told she was a beneficiary. She had never been asked to sign anything. She had never been informed the trust existed. Her mother had known all of this. For more than a decade, she had known. Hadley was sitting very still by the time Renee finished. She asked her to repeat the name of the firm that managed the trust, the company that held the administrative records. Renee read it out. Hadley recognized it immediately. The firm's name appeared in her Company S database, a property management group that her office had cross-referenced on two separate client files in the past year alone. She knew their filing structure. She knew what their documentation looked like. She had processed paperwork that touched their records without ever knowing her own name was sitting somewhere inside them. She thanked Renee, told her she would be in touch, and hung up. Then she opened her work laptop and pulled up the internal records system. She didn't have direct access to the trust file, but she could see enough: the property address, the trust designation, the administrative status, to confirm that what Renee had told her was accurate. The trust was active. It had never been closed. She called an attorney named Brett Lawson the following morning. He came recommended through Renee, who had looked into him specifically after deciding to reach out to Hadley, a Charlotte-based attorney who worked exclusively in trust and estate law. Hadley brought every document she had access to and laid out the full picture: the trust, the property, the forged lease addendum, the years of silence. Brett listened without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled up the trust category under North Carolina estate law and walked her through it steadily. The trust was enforceable. Hadley standing as a named beneficiary was unambiguous. Her mother could not legally sell, refinance, or transfer any interest in the property without Hadley's signature, and any attempt to do so without that consent would constitute a serious breach of fiduciary responsibility. "What do you want to do?" Brett asked. Hadley thought about it for a moment. "I want to wait," she said. "I don't want them to know I know. Not yet." Brett agreed that was the stronger position. They would document everything. File a protective notice with the county recorder's office to flag the property against unauthorized transfer, and hold the formal response until the right moment. Before leaving his office, Hadley made one more call to a journalist named Jade Mercer, who covered legal affairs and family court cases for a Charlotte area publication. Jade had written 2 previous pieces on trust disputes involving elderly estates and had a reputation for careful, sourced reporting. Hadley sent her the core documents that afternoon and explained the situation in broad terms. Jade called back within the hour. She said the story had the elements she looked for: a documented trust, a clear beneficiary, and a pattern of concealment, but that she would need evidence of active intent before she could move forward with anything publishable. Something that showed the other side knew exactly what they were doing. That evidence, it turned out, was already on its way to Hadley, tucked inside an envelope with her name written in her mother's handwriting, sealed with a strip of pastel pink. The invitation was for a Saturday evening, a celebration of Courtney's official acceptance into the UNC Charlotte medical program, hosted at the family home. The same house that, by law, Hadley had an equal claim to. Her mother had addressed the envelope by hand. That detail wasn't lost on Hadley. It meant the invitation had been deliberate. Not a mass mailing, not a group text, but a specific, considered choice to include her. Her mother wanted her there. She wanted Hadley to stand in that backyard and watch Courtney be celebrated. Wanted her surrounded by 30 people who all believed the same version of the family story. Wanted the social weight of the room to do what direct pressure hadn't and to manage to accomplish. Hadley called Simone that night after reading it. Simone's response was immediate. "Don't go. There's nothing good that happens if you walk into that." "I need to be there," Hadley said. There was a long pause. Why? Hadley didn't explain fully. She just said she would text her afterward and that she needed Simone to trust her on this one. Simone didn't like it, but she didn't argue further. The next morning, Hadley sent 2 separate messages, one to Brett and one to Jade, with the date, time, and address. She told them both the same thing. That night was the moment. Brett confirmed he would have the injunction paperwork ready to file electronically the second she gave the word. Jade said the article was drafted and sitting in her queue, needing only Hadley's go-ahead to publish. Everything was in place. All Hadley had to do was show up. The party had already been running for close to an hour by the time she arrived. She could hear it from the street. Low music, the sound of overlapping conversations, the particular warmth of a gathering where everyone already knows each other. The backyard was strung with Edison bulb lights that cast everything in amber. Folding tables had been set up along the fence line, and about 30 people moved between them, holding drinks and plates of food. Courtney was standing near the back, in a white dress, next to their mother, who was working the room the way she always had, hand on someone's arm, leaning in close, laughing at the right moments. Their father stood near the drinks table, largely separate from the main flow of people. No one came to greet Hadley when she walked through the side gate. A few people glanced over, and she could see the flicker of recognition and confusion crossed their faces before they looked away. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She found a spot near the edge of the gathering, close enough to hear clearly, and she waited. Renee was seated at one of the far tables. She looked up when Hadley entered and went very still. Their eyes met for a moment. Hadley gave the smallest nod. Renee set her glass down slowly. Her mother stepped toward the center of the yard, about 20 minutes after Hadley arrived. Someone tapped a glass to get the room's attention, and the conversations around her dropped to a murmur. She spoke warmly and at length about Courtney's dedication, about the years of work it had taken, about what it meant to watch a child achieve something meaningful. She talked about family sacrifice, about how much it mattered to show up for the people you loved. There were nods and soft sounds of agreement from the people around her. Then she said that Courtney would be relocating to Charlotte the following month, and that suitable housing in the South End had already been arranged. Close to campus, comfortable, somewhere she could settle in and focus entirely on her studies. She did not say Hadley's name. She did not say whose apartment it was. She presented it as a solved problem, already handled, a fait accompli. The people around her began to applaud. Hadley looked down at her phone and typed one word to Brett. Now. She pressed send and slid the phone back into her pocket. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. Brett filed the injunction electronically, simultaneously sending a cease and desist to the family's attorney of record, citing the active trust, Hadley standing as a named beneficiary, and the documented attempt to transfer trust-adjacent assets without dual consent. At the same moment, Jade S. article went live on the Publication S website. The headline read, "Charlotte woman discovers she is legal heir to family trust," a decade after being forced out of her home at 16. The first phone to light up was her mother, S. She glanced at the screen mid-applause, and her expression shifted in a way that silenced her before anyone else noticed. Then Courtney's phone buzzed in her hand. Then, someone near the back of the yard held their screen up and read the headline aloud, haltingly, like they weren't sure they were reading it correctly. The yard went quiet in the particular way that 30 people all realizing something at once sounds. Not silent, but suddenly very still. Renee stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The stillness carried her words across the entire yard without effort. "I've been quiet about this for a long time," she said. "Too long. And I think everyone here deserves to know what actually happened in this family. Starting with the night a 16-year-old girl was sent out of this house with nowhere to go." Her mother stepped forward. "Renee, this is not the time." Renee didn't stop. She kept speaking, evenly and clearly, and the people around her stayed where they were. Hadley didn't wait for it to finish. She had already heard everything she needed to hear from Renee in private. She turned, walked back through the side gate, and moved down the front path toward the street. She didn't look back at the lights, didn't listen for her name, didn't slow her pace. She didn't know exactly what was being said behind her in that backyard, and for the first time in her life, she genuinely didn't need to. The consequences came quietly, not in a single blow, but in the steady accumulation of legal paperwork, exactly the way Brett had said they would. Within days of the injunction being filed, the trust was formally frozen. Hadley's mother could not sell the property, could not refinance it, could not transfer any interest in it to another party without Hadley's written consent. Every financial move she might have made with that house was now contingent on a signature she was never going to get. The county recorder's office had the protective notice on file. It wasn't going anywhere. The lease fraud report came from a direction her mother hadn't anticipated. The building management company, after being contacted by Brett and reviewing the submitted paperwork, filed their own report with the Charlotte Police Department. They'd received forged documents identifying a tenant who had not authorized any changes to her lease. That was a matter for law enforcement, not just civil court, and they handled it accordingly. Hadley hadn't needed to make that call herself. Courtney's situation unfolded more slowly. The Federal Financial Aid Office had opened a review of her application after the trust dispute became a matter of public record through Jade S. article. The review was specifically examining whether family assets had been deliberately obscured to inflate aid eligibility. Courtney wasn't expelled from the program, but her enrollment was placed on indefinite hold pending the outcome. Medical school, at least for now, was not happening. Her father called once. Hadley saw his name on the screen, picked up, and said nothing. She held the phone for about 10 seconds of silence on both ends before ending the call. She didn't block him immediately. She just set the phone down and went back to what she was doing. Her mother's email arrived 2 days later. A long message with a subject line that read, "Please read this." Hadley opened it, got through 3 sentences, and deleted it. She didn't read far enough to know whether it contained an apology or an explanation or another attempt at negotiation. It didn't matter enough to find out. Courtney sent one final message. "I want you to know I didn't know what they were doing with the trust. I didn't know any of it." Hadley read it twice. She didn't respond, not because she disbelieved her entirely, and not because she was still angry. She had simply reached the point where she no longer had the energy to sort through who had known what and when. The question of Courtney's awareness had stopped feeling like something worth resolving. She blocked all 3 of them on a Tuesday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Simone was across from her, reading something on her phone. Neither of them made a big moment of it. Hadley went through the contacts one by one, pressed block, and set her phone face up on the table. Simone looked up. "How do you feel?" Hadley thought about it honestly. "Light," she said. The trust proceedings continued in the background. Brett was working through the legal process of formally establishing Hadley's share of the assets. There was no urgency to it, no dramatic resolution date. Just paperwork moving through the correct channels at the correct pace. The way things work when you have the law on your side and you no longer in a hurry to prove anything to anyone. Before we close out today's story, I want to take a moment, because I think what Hadley went through deserves more than just a summary. What struck me most about this story isn't the legal victory. It's the fact that Hadley spent 11 years building something real, entirely on her own, and her family only came back when they wanted a piece of it. They didn't return to apologize. They didn't return to reconnect. They returned with a plan. And I think that distinction matters. Because a lot of us have been taught that family is something you owe, unconditionally, no matter what they've done. Hadley's story is a reminder that protecting yourself isn't the same as abandoning your family. Sometimes it's the only response left when they already abandoned you. She didn't block them out of bitterness. She did it from a place of clarity. And I think that's the hardest kind of boundary to hold, the quiet one, made on a Tuesday morning over coffee, without drama, without an audience. The real question I want to leave you with is this. If you were in Hadley's position, if someone who had removed you from your own life came back years later asking for the life you built, would you have done what she did? Would you have stayed silent and planned carefully? Or would you have confronted them the moment you found out the truth? There's no wrong answer. But I genuinely love to know where you stand. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And this is exactly the kind of story where your perspective matters. If this story stayed with you, please consider subscribing to Family Drama Stories. Every story on this channel is chosen because it carries something real, and your support is what makes it possible to keep sharing them. Thank you for being here, and I see you in the next one.